Wyoming Territory, October 1878. The first snow had dusted the tops of the Bighorn Mountains when Zachary Dalton kicked open the rotted cellar door beneath the abandoned farmhouse and found her. The chain around her ankle clinked softly. She did not scream or flinch. She just stared up at him with wide, hollow eyes, skin pale against the dark dirt floor. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn, hands scraped and raw. She looked barely alive. Jesus. Zachary dropped to his knees, reaching carefully for her. "You're all right now, I got you." She didn't say a word. But when his hand touched hers, she gripped it like it was the only thing real in the world. She never let go. Zachary had only come out this way to check the property after the last tenant up and vanished 3 weeks ago. He had not expected this. He had not expected her. The chain was rusted to a rotted beam. He used his hunting knife to pry the bolt loose, then carried her out of the cellar like she weighed nothing. Back at his ranch, he laid her gently on the bed in the room across from his own. She still held his hand, even as he sat beside her, even as he wiped the dirt from her brow with a damp cloth. "I'm Zachary," he said quietly. "You're safe now, I swear it." She blinked once, still no words, but her grip stayed firm. He gave her space, let her rest. Kept the fire going through the night. But every time he tried to stand, she tugged his hand to keep him there, so he stayed. The next morning, she ate the broth he spooned for her, still silent, still looking at him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tipped sideways. "Do you know your name?" he asked gently. She stared at the fire. Zachary leaned back in the chair, watching her. She wasn't just scared. Something deeper had been taken from her. He didn't push. By the third day, she was stronger, sitting upright in bed. He found her staring out the window, her fingers curled against the sill. When he walked in, she turned fast, like she thought he was leaving. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. "You want me to stay, I'll stay." She reached for his hand again. He took it. That night, as the wind howled outside, she finally spoke. "My name's Kayla." He looked up from the stew he was stirring. "Kayla," she nodded once. "Kayla Kingsley." Zachary sat beside her, his voice quiet. "You want to tell me what happened out there?" Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Not yet." "That's all right," he said. "Whenever you're ready." She leaned into him, just a little, just enough. Days turned into a week. Kayla moved quieter than most. She flinched at sudden sounds. She slept with the lamp burning beside her bed. But she smiled once at his dog, Boone, when he brought her a rabbit's foot. Zachary did not ask again about the cellar. He let her heal slow. One evening, as he was feeding the horses, she came out to the barn. "I want to help," she said. He handed her a brush. She started on the mare's flank, her hands steady. "You ever worked horses before?" "My father bred Morgans back in Illinois," she said. "Before he died." Zachary nodded. "You're good with her." Kayla smiled, soft and small. They worked side by side until the sun slipped low. She laughed just once when Boone tried to steal the feed sack. Zachary froze at the sound. It was the first laugh he had heard from her. Later, by the fire, she sat cross-legged on the rug, her eyes on the flames. "I was traveling west with a wagon train," she said. "My brother, his wife, and me. We got separated near Wind River. I took a job with a family heading north, said they needed help with their children." Zachary said nothing. Let her speak. "They locked me in that cellar 2 days after we arrived, said I was unclean. Said the boy died because of me." She looked up at him, something breaking loose behind her eyes. "I didn't touch him. I didn't do anything." "I believe you," Zachary said, firm. "They left me there, said God would decide my fate." Zachary's jaw clenched. He stood and walked to the window, needing a second to breathe. "You will not be judged here," he said finally. She nodded. "I know." He turned back to her. "You are safe, and you will stay safe, I swear it." Kayla rose, walked to him, and took his hand without hesitation. "I know," she whispered. From that night on, she slept better. The lamp stayed off. 2 weeks later, she met his neighbors at the harvest gathering. She wore a pale blue dress that used to belong to his sister and held his arm the whole time. She still did not say much to others, but when Zachary looked at her, she smiled. Winter came early. Snow settled thick around the ranch and the days grew short. She stayed close. They rayed by the fire, cooked together. She helped him mend his shirt one evening, her hands brushing his chest as she worked. He caught her watching him with something new in her eyes. He kissed her that night. It was slow, careful. But when she kissed him back, there was nothing hesitant in it. "I do not want to be afraid anymore," she said, her voice breaking just a little. "You never have to be," he said. They sat wrapped in a quilt by the hearth, the snow falling outside, her head on his shoulder. She reached for his hand again, and again she never let go. By late November, the last of the herds had been driven down from the high pastures, and the sky hung low over the plains like wet wool. Zachary kept to his routine, mending harnesses, splitting wood, checking fence lines, but there was a new rhythm to each day now. Kayla had folded herself into the work with quiet steadiness, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pinned neatly behind her ears. She moved through the house like she'd always belonged there, though she never assumed too much. She asked before using flour, always returned tools to where she found them, and never left a room without checking the fire. One afternoon, as Zachary finished shoeing the bay gelding, he found her kneeling by the root cellar with a basket of jars beside her. She was sorting through preserves, lips pressed thin in thought. "You're not planning to go in there, are you?" he asked, brushing iron filings from his palms. No, she didn't look up. "But I can't ask you to do everything." "I reckon you could," he said, stepping closer, "and I'd still do it." That earned him a glance, the corner of her mouth twitching for a heartbeat before she returned to her task. She held up a jar of stewed apples. "This one's cracked." "Won't last. I'll take it off your hands." Zachary sat with her on the porch steps while the light faded. They ate straight from the jar with wooden spoons. She offered him the last bite, and he took it without a word. A coyote howled far off. Boone lifted his head from where he lay under the wagon but didn't stir. Kayla tucked her hands into her shawl. "I keep remembering things strange, like they don't belong to me." He didn't ask what she meant, just waited. "Last night, I dreamed of my mother's sewing basket. The one with the little brass clasp. I could feel it under my fingers like I was holding it. Maybe it's your way of finding your way back." She looked toward the hills where snow still clung to the crevices. "Sometimes I think I'm not supposed to." Zachary set his spoon down. "You don't owe the past anything." "I might." She folded her hands tightly. "When they locked me in, I screamed for 2 days. No one came. I stopped screaming after that." He didn't move closer, just answered steady. "You don't have to explain it to me." "I know." "But I want to." Next morning, she asked if she could ride with him to the creek where he checked the traps. He saddled the mare she favored and brought his rifle just in case a bobcat had found its way near again. They rode in silence, hooves muffled by old snow and pine needles. At the water's edge, she knelt to scrub her hands. The cold made her gasp, but she stayed there, sleeves dampening, face turned toward the current. "You always come here alone?" she asked. "Mostly. It's quiet." He nodded. "That's the reason." They walked the banks side by side, sun glinting off the water. The traps were empty except for one half-frozen muskrat. She didn't flinch when he ended the creature's suffering. Instead, she asked how the traps worked, what kind he used, how often he set them. He explained, surprised by how closely she listened. On the ride back, she asked, "Do you remember your folks?" "My mother died when I was 16. Father drank himself to death not long after." She didn't say she was sorry. He didn't want her to. Later, while she hemmed a curtain at the table, she said, "I used to think if I married, I'd live in a town, near other women, near a church." Zachary didn't glance up from where he was oiling the saddle leather. "Do you still think that?" "I'm not sure." That night, she didn't go to her room. She stood by the fire long after the supper dishes were cleaned, her shawl clasped tight around her shoulders. When he came in from the barn, she turned to him. "I don't want to be alone tonight." He didn't ask what she meant. He simply took her hand, thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. They lay side by side under his quilt, the wind knocking against the shutters. She pressed her face to the crook of his neck, fingers curled in the fabric of his shirt. "Do you mind the cold?" she asked. "Not with you here." In the dark, she whispered, "I want to build something that can't be taken from me, not ever again." He kissed her temple. "Then we'll build it, together." She fell asleep with her hand in his, her breath warm against his collarbone. When morning came, the storm had passed, and the snow outside gleamed untouched. He found her in the kitchen already at the stove, cheeks pink from the fire, sleeves rolled as she stirred cornmeal batter. She didn't look up when he entered, just said, "I'm thinking of keeping bees next spring. There's a slope near the creek that gets good sun." Zachary leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching her. "I'll help you build the hives," he said. She turned, meeting his eyes, and this time her smile reached the place behind them. The last of the ice broke from the river in early March, cracking down the banks like distant thunder. The wind carried sharpness still, but the earth beneath it had begun to soften. Kayla stood at the edge of the pasture fence, her boots sunk half an inch into thawed mud, watching a red-tailed hawk circle above the ridge. Zachary was mending the west gate behind her, hammer thudding slow and steady. She listened to the rhythm of it, the same way she had once listened to her father's footsteps on the porch, heavy, reliable, never rushed. "I've been thinking about planting flax," she said without turning. Zachary paused, hammer stilled in his hand. "You wanting to spin it or sell it?" "Both, maybe." She leaned forward on the fence rail. "I miss the sound the wheel makes when it catches right. There was a woman in Decatur used to dye it with indigo, deepest blue I've ever seen." He stepped beside her, wiping his hands on his trousers. "We can clear a patch near the north slope. Ground's been resting there a few years." She nodded, quiet a moment. "I'm not used to being asked. I'm not used to anyone wanting to stay." She looked at him then, eyes steady. "I do." Zachary didn't answer, but his hand found hers. She laced their fingers together without hesitation. That night, he brought down an old ledger from a high shelf in the storeroom. It had been his mother's, once pages filled with recipes, planting notes, the occasional verse. Kayla ran her fingers over the ink like it might speak to her. "Your mother wrote with a fine hand." Her voice was hushed, almost reverent. She liked order, he said. "Even when things weren't." Kayla turned a page. "There's a recipe here for lye soap with spruce resin. My mother used tallow but never added resin." Zachary leaned his elbows on the table. "We've got spruce down by the ravine. You want to try it?" She gave a small nod. "I'd like that." The days grew longer and the air shifted. They worked in tandem now, not needing to speak much to keep pace. She kept a strip of cloth tied around her wrist to blot her brow, and when she laughed, it came from deep in her chest, unguarded. One afternoon, while hauling firewood, Zachary caught her humming a low, meandering tune he didn't recognize. He set the logs down. "What's that song?" She hesitated, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Something my grandmother sang when I was small. I hadn't thought of it in years." "Sing the rest." "I don't remember all the words." She smiled, sheepish. "Only the feel of it." "I'd still like to hear it." She sang it again, just the melody, soft and slow, as the sun glinted off the snowmelt pooling in the ruts. The sound hung between them like breath in cold air. That evening, she brought her sewing to the porch while he sharpened tools. The air smelled of wet bark and wood smoke. She stitched in silence for a while, then said, "I was almost married once." Zachary didn't look up. "What happened?" He was kind, but he wanted a wife who would stay behind. Her needle paused in midair. "I've never been good at staying behind." Zachary leaned against the porch post. "You don't have to be anything but what you are." "I don't know what that is anymore." He met her eyes. "You're the woman who faced down a winter that should have killed her." "That's something." Her breath caught, barely audible, but she didn't look away. Spring came in fits and starts rain one day, frost the next. They planted flax and onions, built 2 bee boxes from leftover pine boards, and cleared the fallen limbs from the orchard. He watched her sink her hands into the soil with a reverence that made him still. One morning, she rose early and pulled on his old canvas coat, the sleeves rolled twice. She went out to the barn without waking him. When he followed, he found her crouched beside the calving stall, the chestnut mare laboring hard. She didn't glance up. "She's close. I can feel the hooves." Zachary stepped beside her, ready to help, but she shook her head. "I've got her." He waited in the corner, silent, as she coaxed the mare through it steady, calm, hands sure. When the foal slipped free onto the straw, Kayla pressed a towel to its nose and cleared the mouth. The mare reached to nuzzle her baby. Kayla leaned back on her heels, breathless. Zachary stepped forward. "You all right?" She turned toward him, cheeks flushed, eyes wet. "I didn't think I'd get to do something like that again." "You did more than all right," he said. She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned into his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I want to stay here," she said, voice muffled. "You already do." "No, I mean truly, not just until summer, not until I find something else. I want this to be mine too." Zachary pulled back just enough to see her face. "Then it is." She nodded once, firm. "Then I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her there in the straw, the scent of new hay and warm earth around them, the foal already rising on shaky legs behind them, and for the first time, she didn't just hold his hand. She took it in hers and walked forward. The first thunder rolled in from the west just after dusk, low and uneven. Kayla had just come in from the porch with a basket of damp linens when the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Zachary was crouched by the stove, coaxing flame from fresh kindling. "That wind's carrying something," she said, setting the basket down. "Storm'll sit on us by midnight," he answered without looking up. "You feel it in your chest," she nodded, "like it's pulling something loose." By the time the rain came, the sky had gone ink dark. They sat by the fire a while, both listening. Boone paced near the door, uneasy with the scent of lightning. Kayla threaded a line of cotton through a needle but didn't stitch. Her fingers moved over the fabric like she was trying to remember something it used to mean. "Did you ever think about leaving for the coast?" she asked. "I thought about it," Zachary said, "before I had anything that kept me here." She turned toward him, one hand still curled around the cloth. "What changed it?" He looked at her like he was weighing something that couldn't be put into words. "Then, you did." Kayla didn't answer, but she set the needle down. That night, while the storm cracked over the plains, she stood at the window in her nightdress, hair falling loose past her shoulders. Rain traced the glass, and her reflection flickered with every flash. Zachary woke to find the bed empty beside him and rose without lighting the lamp. "You all right?" he asked from the doorway. She didn't turn. "I used to love storms back home, before everything. I'd sit on the porch with my brother and count the seconds between thunder." He stepped behind her. "You can still love them." She leaned back into him, her voice quieter than the rain. "I'm trying." The next morning, the creek had swollen over its banks, and a cottonwood had split near the fence line. They rode out to check for damage, water sloshing at the horse's legs. Kayla kept pace beside him, her skirts tied up, boots soaked to the heel. At the edge of the lower pasture, they found a portion of the fencing collapsed, posts snapped and wire twisted. "We'll have to clear it before stock wanders," Zachary said. Kayla dismounted without hesitation. "Hand me your blade. I'll start with the wire." They worked until midday. Her braid had come undone, and a scrape marked her forearm where a branch had caught. She didn't mention it. When he offered his canteen, she drank with her eyes closed, face turned toward the sun that had finally broken through. On the way back, she asked, "Did you ever think about having children?" Zachary adjusted the reins. "Sometimes. Didn't think I'd raise them alone." She was quiet a moment. "I used to pray for twins. Thought if I had two, they'd never be lonely." He looked at her sidelong. "You still want that?" Her hand rested lightly on the saddle horn. "I want what grows steady, what doesn't vanish when winter comes." He reached over, brushing his fingers against hers. "Then we'll build that, from the dirt up." She didn't answer right away. But when they reached the barn, she dismounted and turned toward him. "Zachary, I want your name." He blinked, unsure he'd heard right. "You mean?" "I want it like land wants rain, like something earned." He stepped forward, heart thudding with quiet weight. "Then it's yours." Later, she sat with his mother's Bible at the kitchen table, tracing the faded family names. She added hers in ink just below his, Kayla Kingsley Dalton. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just nodded once, like she'd placed something heavy in the ground and trusted it to take root. That night, he carried her across the threshold again, but this time, it was with the door wide open and every lamp lit. The storm had passed. The world was quiet. And she let go of his hand only long enough to hold his face in both of hers and kiss him with the full weight of everything she'd lived through. He kissed her back like he meant to spend every year of his life learning the shape of her strength. Outside, the grass whispered in the dark, growing tall again. By mid-May, the last drifts of snow had melted into the soil, and the land had begun to green in earnest. Shoots of flax reached upward in the north field, and the bees worked the wild plum blossoms with quiet devotion. Kayla walked the rows each morning with a basket and a wide-brimmed straw hat, her movements patient, deliberate. She had taken to humming as she worked not the lullabies of her childhood, but new melodies she made up as she went, small things that stayed in Zachary's head long after she'd stopped. One afternoon, she found him in the workshop behind the barn, bent over a length of cedar. He was carving something narrow and smooth, shavings pooled around his boots. "What's that?" she asked, stepping inside, her arms still dusted with flour. He held it up. "Spindle for your flax." She touched it as if it might vanish. "You made that for me. I figured if you were going to spin, you'd want something that fit your hands." She ran a thumb along the grain. "You remembered how I hold thread." "I notice things," he said, and when she looked up at him, he added, "especially when they matter." That evening, she spun by the hearth, trying the new spindle. Her thread ran even and strong, and she didn't need to say anything for him to see how much it pleased her. The next Sunday, a letter arrived from Cheyenne. It was addressed to Kayla, her name penned in a hand she hadn't seen in over a year. She read it on the porch, face unreadable, fingers tight at the edges. Zachary waited. When she folded it and tucked it into her apron, she said, "It's from my brother's widow. She's living near Fort Laramie now, remarried to a wheelwright." She thought I might be dead. "You want to see her?" Kayla shook her head slowly. "No, I don't think I do. She stopped looking when it got hard. I don't fault her for surviving, but I won't go back to a place that left me behind." Zachary nodded once. "Then we keep forward." That night, she stood beside the big window in the front room, watching the wind roll through the grass. "I thought I'd carry more bitterness than I do," she said. "But I don't feel angry anymore. You don't have to carry what doesn't serve you." She turned and stepped close. "You've always spoken plain, like the wind through cotton, no weight added where none's needed." He smiled softly. "You've always known how to listen." She brought a hand to his chest. "I know what I want now." Zachary looked at her, his voice low. "What's that?" "To grow old with dirt under my nails, to teach children how to listen to bees. To lay beside you when the spring storms come." He reached for her face, holding her as gently as he had the first time. "Then that's what we'll do." They were married a week later, under the cottonwoods down by the creek. The preacher came from town in a wagon, and the neighbors brought food and fiddle music. Kayla wore a dress she'd sewn herself cream with a green sash, and Zachary wore his father's boots, polished until the leather caught the sun. When he took her hands during the vows, she didn't tremble. She looked at him like she'd already lived 100 lives with him and had chosen him in each one. After the guests had gone home and the stars had settled above the ridge, they sat on the porch steps, her head resting against his shoulder. "Do you think it'll always be this quiet?" she asked. "Maybe not," he said, "but we'll always come back to it." She nodded. "That's enough." They built their life in layers after that, slow, careful, constant. The flax was harvested, spun, and dyed with onion skins and elderberry. Kayla sold the cloth to the mercantile in town and kept enough to sew shirts for Zachary that fit just right through the shoulders. She taught 2 neighbor girls how to card wool and boil dye, their hands stained blue for a week. Zachary worked the land as he always had, but now there was a second coffee cup on the table each morning and a soft laugh he could hear through the open window when he came back from the fields. By the second autumn, Kayla's belly had begun to swell. She walked slower, sat longer, and Zachary learned to cook cornbread without burning the edges. They didn't speak much about what was coming, it wasn't their way, but every evening, he ran a hand across her stomach and rested his ear against her side like he was listening for the future. Their son was born in early March, just before the melt. He was strong, lunged, and dark-haired and took to Kayla's breast like he'd been waiting for her all his life. They named him Elias after Zachary's grandfather and wrapped him in a blanket Kayla had spun herself. That spring, the bees returned early. The flax bloomed blue by the second week of May. Kayla walked the rows again, Elias strapped to her chest, her hands brushing the blossoms as she passed. Zachary watched her from the porch, the spindle she no longer needed resting on the windowsill beside him. "I never thought I'd have this," she said one night, rocking Elias while the fire burned low. Zachary leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You made it." She looked up at him, eyes warm. "We did." And in the years that followed, through drought and harvest, through long summers and snowbound winters, they never let go of what they'd built. Their home became known for its honey and its hand-dyed cloth, for the way you could hear laughter through the windows even on the coldest days. Neighbors came seeking advice or seeds or just a place by the fire when the world got too hard. And always, there was Kayla, steady and sure, her fingers never idle, her voice always gentle. And always there was Zachary beside her. They grew old together. Not quickly, but with the gradual grace of people who had earned every line in their palms. They raised Elias to be kind and curious. He learned to ride before he could write and took to the bees like an heir to something sacred. When he married, it was under the same cottonwoods by the creek. And when the years had laid silver in Kayla's braid and slowed Zachary's stride, they still ended each day on the porch, fingers laced, eyes on the horizon. "I dreamed of this once," she said, rocking gently, "but it was never this good." Zachary kissed the back of her hand. "That's because we didn't dream it, we lived it." And the wind moved through the grass again, soft and full, as if it too knew peace.